Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson. Today we're going to be talking about Arthur Conan Doyle, a subject very dear to the heart of a friend of mine, Matt Wingett. Matt's been writing books and all sorts of histories about Portsmouth for many years, and a lot of the books he's been doing lately have been about Arthur Conan Doyle, who we all know as the author of Sherlock Holmes, but he's also a prolific writer on the supernatural and other spooky things. So today we'll be talking to Matt Smith and Arthur Conan Doyle. Well, we won't be talking to Arthur Conan Doyle, but you know what I mean. All right.
Dave,
Matt, can we talk to Arthur Conan Doyle?
Dave, I'm going to have to stop you because you introduced me as Matt Smith.
Did I?
Yeah.
That's what happens when you watch too much Doctor Who. Okay. It is. It's not Matt Smith. Okay, I'm going to leave that just so people can see how silly I am. It's Matt Wingett, and people will now know your name. It's not Matt Wingett. And here's me thinking the biggest problem in the introduction was that we were going to talk to Arthur Conan Doyle today. So,
well, it could happen. He was a spiritualist.
He was. So, I was said in the introduction when I was talking about Matt Smith, the famous Doctor Who, as opposed to the famous Matt Wingett, was that. You live in Portsmouth, you live in Southsea, which Arthur Conan Doyle did as well, which has led you to do a lot of stuff on Arthur Conan Doyle. And it's interesting in the past because we said that Arthur Conan Doyle was a spiritualist. I don't know if you can see the book here.
Yes.
Which is one of your first, which interesting story, how you first basically came, you were basically doing that as a straight transcription of all these type of things, and it led you to a much bigger world. Can you tell us about that? How did you get into Arthur Conan Doyle?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that's really weird about Arthur Conan Doyle is everyone associates him with London because of Sherlock Holmes, 221B Baker Street. But what people don't realise was that really he learned his writing craft and indeed created Sherlock Holmes whilst he was living in Southsea, which is like the seaside resort part of Portsmouth. And I grew up in Portsmouth, and so very often I would walk past the place where he worked as a GP, pushing out these short stories in his spare time. And it sort of grew in my consciousness as time went by. I was working for a publisher when I was in my teens, and they brought out a book called A Study in Southsea, which was about his life in Southsea. But what really did it for me was that there was something called the Richard Lancelyn Green Bequest, which was given to the Portsmouth City Council. Lancelyn Green was a fantastic, absolutely crazy fanatic about Arthur Conan Doyle. He was crazy about him. And he collected all sorts of stuff, which after his death, he bequeathed to Portsmouth City Council. And they've got the largest publicly owned collection of Doyleana in the world. And one day I was in there at the museum, at the library, and I got talking to the head archivist. He said, "Do you want to come and see?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay," because they was trying to sort through all this stuff. And basically, it was kind of like Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know, that end bit where there's all these boxes piled up everywhere. And I went in and just saw, I mean, basically they've got 34,000 books and documents plus 18,000 further artifacts from Arthur Conan Doyle's life. It's absolutely extraordinary, from first editions through to waistcoats, or vests as they say in America, through to pipes and boxing gloves. It is just extraordinary. So yeah, that's really what got me into it, and that's what also started me down the track with Conan Doyle and the Mysterious World of Light, because I was walking past one box and I just lifted it off, and there was a copy of Light magazine. And Light magazine was the spiritualist, and still exists, is the spiritualist magazine that covers all manners of the strange and paranormal. And Conan Doyle announced his spiritualism when he was living in Southsea in 1887. So that started me down that track. Absolutely extraordinary journey that it was, because as you say, my initial intention was just to reprint his articles. And then as I got to read the articles, they became increasingly fascinating. And some of the articles were responses to other people's letters. And so I had to, obviously I couldn't just reprint these things. I needed to put it all into context. And I ended up telling the story of spiritualism at the end of the 19th century through the eyes of Conan Doyle. Amazing. Yeah, really fascinating job, that.
Before you all did this, how interested were you in, would you have been interested in Arthur Conan Doyle, do you think, had you been born in Bournemouth or in Scotland or in Australia or wherever? What do you think, what is it about Arthur Conan Doyle that actually interests you?
Oh, it is definitely for me to do with location. I'm a local guy who grew up in Portsmouth and in the surrounding area. And one of the things that I became aware of as time went by is that Portsmouth has got, unfortunately, these days, very low literacy levels. It hasn't got many great readers in it. Great. So I'm an author selling books about Portsmouth in Portsmouth where no one reads. Fantastic. And I realised that part of the deal should be to celebrate our literary heroes in Portsmouth, to be saying to people in Portsmouth and around the world, look, there's some great people who've come from here, because it's not just Conan Doyle. Charles Dickens was born here. Rudyard Kipling grew up here. H.G. Wells worked here. Neil Gaiman grew up here and was born here. So there's all sorts of writers who are connected. And I just think if we're going to feel good about writing, about reading, about books, about all of that knowledge, then yeah, let's celebrate our local heroes. And that's why I do it, really.
And you're very lucky if you've got the largest collection of Doyleani, or however you ever pronounced it, in the world. Is that all accessible to everyone, or how do you get into it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge archive. And if you want to do research on Conan Doyle, then basically you ring Portsmouth Library and you speak to the senior archivist and say, can I come in and have an appointment? And that's how it works, basically. And yeah, it's really fascinating. And I have indeed sat there with letters and all sorts of things that were that belonged to Conan Doyle originally. So yeah.
Do you see yourself as academic?
No, I mean, I've got a degree, and I was asked to stay on at university. And my degree is English literature and philosophy, which is an interesting mix. And I was asked to stay on and do research. But quite honestly, by the time I got to the end of my BA, I just thought we're done. I want to just do other stuff. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not well suited to the discipline of academia. What happens with me is if I get a project between my teeth, that's me. I just want to do that thing. And if anyone else has got any other ideas, yeah, I'll listen. But I know what I already want to do. So being under a supervisor or a lecturer would no, it wouldn't be where I would be as a person.
I just say that because you've got all this. You spoke before about when you took on the project of the World of Light and Light magazine, and you were going through it, and you said, I don't want to just publish these articles. I want to interpret them, put them into the context they are. And I mean, how did that teach you? Is that is an academic type thing? It's not just I mean, it's going in your head. You're reading other things. You're looking at his waistcoat. You look at his boxing gloves. You must be interpreting and mashing that all together.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But I think one of the things for me that I kind of, because I got asked to stay on and do philosophy. That's what I was asked to do. For me, the thing about this book is true of all the books I do, which is essentially it's telling a story. It's telling the story of his life when he came to Southsea, when he first started attending seances, when he then had this revelation that actually it must be real, because he started off just doing like studies in telepathy and experiments in telepathy with a friend of his whilst he was here, and he met all these people. He even met A.P. Sinnett, and A.P. Sinnett was the right hand man of Madame Blavatsky of Theosophist fame. So and he happened to be here in Southsea. So it's really fascinating, and for me it was about being able to make sense of this extraordinary man. And it's not really academic. It's about, although people have said it's a well-studied work, and I appreciate that from them. But it's really about telling the story about how this man came to have so many facets, because not only was he a man who went on to believe absolutely in poltergeists and ghosts and even fairies, but the very same year that he announced himself to be a spiritualist was the very, very same year that his very first Sherlock Holmes novel was published, and Sherlock Holmes, of course, is the arch rationalist who lives in a materialist world with no room for spirit whatsoever. I find that fascinating, and that's why I really did looked into it.
Okay, so there's all, and I'm focusing on this because it just sounds fascinating to me that there's
Yeah.
just so much information there. Really, I'm assuming you could probably walk there or not too far. It's you're lucky you've got that. How, how do you find? Is it archive? I mean, is it all sort of like indexed, or have you found special things in there over the years that other people didn't even realize was something in between a book or something like that?
Well, I think what happens is that just things that are in there set me off on a track, and then I'd start doing loads of other research. I mean, I always wondered what stuff he produced from his early years whilst he was living in Southsea. A lot of it did indeed make it into collections, but there were about 20 or so stories that were never collected, and he completely forgot about them. So they did. Um, Bibliographers Richard Lancelyn Green and John Gibson, who I met just a few years ago. Not Richard, he's deceased, but John. They did this bibliography, which found a lot of the stories, and indeed on the back of that, they also produced a collection of his uncollected stories. It doesn't have everything in that I've produced for my latest book, but it was a great piece of work. But so that was so that was kind of one of my points of reference, and then it's just all sorts of research, just looking here and there. I've been in contact with the Arthur Conan Doyle estate, asking them if there were any other stories that had been missed. There's a fantastic biographer called Andrew Lycett, who wrote the definitive biography of Arthur Conan Doyle. I've been in contact with him. There's another biographer who wrote a fantastic book called Conan Doyle, Teller of Tales. That's right. And his name is Daniel Stashauer, and both of them are just fantastic. They're really wonderful, resources to go to and get all sorts of information from. So yes, I've actually forgotten the name of the Lycett ones, which is really rude because it's fantastic.
Okay, I'm sure if people want to find it, they can. But
Yes,
what it really meant was, because I'm thinking, are they in boxes? It wasn't so much the bug, and we'll get to that because obviously we're here today to talk about your new book,
yeah.
which I'll show on the screen there. It's the
Oh
Arthur
yeah.
Conan Doyle's Southsea Stories and Beyond, and I want to get that to in a sec. But this is just out of my own curiosity, because when sometimes you go through, people's boxes, you might have a family member, or you go through your
Yeah.
grandfather's something or other like that. Is it like that, or is it all been? Has this
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of books? Are they all there for people to just look on an index?
Okay, so when I saw this, you've got to bear in mind this was about 15 years ago when I saw it.
Yep.
And since then, they have had teams of archivists go in, archive the material, cross references. First of all, I think they put it onto Rolodexes or onto cards, and then have entered it all up into a database. So I think pretty much all of it now has been catalogued. So yeah, I mean, it's there to look up. And like I say, I mean, the best way to find out about it is to go to Portsmouth Library or ring them or go onto their website and just dig around. And the Conan Doyle archive is really, really something. I mean, it's quite special. Yeah.
So that brings us to your book, which I just said was Arthur Conan Doyle's Southsea Stories and Beyond. You've
Yes.
found stories that have not necessarily been published. Of these stories in there, how many have not been published before?
Okay, so it's not that they haven't been published before, because all of these stories were originally published in the 1880s, or most of them.
Okay.
So of course they have been published previously, except for one, which was one that was sent to Blackwood's magazine when Conan Doyle was, well, I guess in his late teens, early 20s. It's his very first story. And he sent it to Blackwood's magazine, and they thought, oh, yeah, this is quite good. He's got some promise, this boy. And they put it on file, and they never wrote back to him, and they never published it. And it's called The Haunted Grange of Gossthorpe. And it's basically a classic Gothic horror story, and it's the very first one in the book. And that one lay in the archives for years and years and years until finally the Arthur Conan Doyle Society published it as a single volume with essays. So it has been published before, but it's never been published in a collection. And so that's what I'm doing with that one. And I had to get permission from the Conan Doyle estate for that one because it's the only one that's still in copyright, having only been published for the first time in 2000.
Okay.
So, and they were great about it. They're really helpful. And, descendants of Conan Doyle had to each of them give their permission. So, and they were really cool about it. So it's great. Yeah.
So these are stories that, if I was a super Conan Doyle fan, which I'm not, but I think he's great. But is this stuff that people might not necessarily actually be able to get all that easily, and you're now making it available to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Like I say, they the whole lot, because there's another story in there called the Bloodstone Tragedy, which is all about a guy who goes mad and tries to sacrifice a woman to the ancient Celtic gods, which is quite marvelous. That's never been put into a collection before. So that one, and what this does is it draws together book stories that have been in other collections, but not collected during his lifetime, plus adds some extras, so that you have this neat and tidy, all one volume collection of the uncollected stories.
Do you want to show us a copy of this beautiful tome that you've got there? You've got a nice hard copy version there. Do you want to show us?
Yes, I've got 2 copies of it, actually. Oh. These are the only ones at the moment in existence. These are both proof copies. So this is the rather lovely paperback, which I designed this all up myself. So I'm really chuffed with it, basically. Yeah. There we go. So nice. There's the paperback. And then, of course, we have the rather sumptuous looking hardback, which, again, I designed up and, just really, really pleased with it. It looks so classy. When I got it out of the of the thing yesterday, out of the packet, because it only arrived yesterday, I was just like, oh, all this work I've done is just so worth it. It's a beautiful thing. So yes, I'm quite proud of it.
Well, tell us about the actual, like, what was he like as a writer? Is it, you said some of these when he's early in his life. Are they any good?
Well, this is what I find really fascinating, because it feels like Arthur Conan Doyle as a writer came out of the womb ready-made. It's quite extraordinary. His what he's got in his early stories is a really neat turn of phrase and really fast plot lines, so that you get a lot into a short story. It reminds me very much, if anyone's read A Study in Scarlet, that the kind of style of writing is very much in that area. A Study in Scarlet, it's which is the first Holmes novel he wrote whilst he was living in Southsea as well. It's an extraordinary achievement, and I have to say, there's a side to me, because I also am a novelist and a short story writer, that's incredibly jealous of the kind of the neat, fast line that he manages to get. Now, he's writing for, among other things, The Boy's Own Paper, and The Boy's Own Paper was, an adventure magazine, so it had to be like that. So he focuses some of his stories. He's got horror, he's got murder, and he's also got Wild West adventures as well. There's a right mixture in there of exciting things, and ghost stories, plenty. So it's a really interesting mixture. But yeah, I would say the stories, what you see is a young man developing his palette, really. The things that he's going to use later that are going to be, go into the classics. There's a really, really great early story from, I think, about 1884 called The Winning Shot. And it is just a great piece of, so it's set in Dartmoor in a big, lonely country house. It has a great big dog. And there's a terrible supervillain in it who is trying to influence people. And he has a very strange and exotic background. And what you see in there is, you see, of course, elements of The Hound of the Baskervilles, but also with this super brilliant villain, you have Moriarty as well. So there's all these elements just kind of waiting to kind of come together. But The Winning Shot is a great story. It's a really well worked piece of writing. And he must have been 24 at the time when he wrote it. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah.
So I mean, it is. I always sometimes think when you get early writings of someone, they might have went on to become a great writer, but at the time they were like, very childlike or might have just been rubbish. But you're saying it's actually a really good reads.
It's well done. I think that what you see in it is him inching his way towards Sherlock Holmes. So all the elements are being laid down, and the reason I called it the Southsea Stories is that there are about 3 that were written before he was in Southsea. Then there's about 20 or so that were written whilst he was in Southsea. And what's clear is whilst he's in Southsea, he's broadening his palette. He's meeting people in Southsea. He's drawing on his previous experiences because, as a young man in his mid-teens, mid to late teens, he went on a whaling expedition to the Arctic as a ship's surgeon. He also went down the west coast of Africa as a ship's surgeon on a cargo ship, and he's incorporating all these elements to then. And then he moves into Southsea, and he's then got this kind of rather beautiful seaside resort, and he starts using elements in that. And you see those elements just staying with him throughout his writing career. There are another 10 stories after he leaves Portsmouth that go right the way through his career, the last one being 1930. And each one of them, except I'd say for probably one, has some kind of influence from Southsea in it. It's quite extraordinary how this was the place where he drew together all of his experience and knowledge, and started to really turn the stories out. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Have you written much in this book? I mean, have you done your own interpretation? I imagine you've given it an introduction. Or
Yeah.
what have you done with the stories?
Well, I mean, I thought that what I wanted to do was give the stories a real context. And so I thought, well, I can give it a kind of Southsea context, but I also wanted to give it a wider context in the flow of Conan Doyle's life. So I also invited Andrew Lycett, whose book name I forgot what it was, but the definitive biography of Conan Doyle, and I asked him to write the preface. So what he does is he gives a really nice preface, just sort of saying what Conan Doyle had been up to previously and what his life in Southsea meant to him. And then what I do is I then go into a bit more detail in my introduction about that connection with Southsea and about what these stories tell you. And then at the end of each story, I give you little sort of like fun pieces of information about the stories and how they connect to Southsea. For example, there's one story that's set in the Highlands of Scotland, and there's a fictional Scottish village there called Rudmore. Now, there is no such place as Rudmore in Scotland, but there is a district of Portsmouth called Rudmore, and he clearly stole that and used it for a name for a story, or for a place in the story. And this is what he does. But it's not only that. There's other stories that are called the Birches Pool stories, and the Birches Pool stories are in fact a fictionalized version of Southsea. And that's kind of interesting because he lived on a place called Elm Grove. So he uses trees and he uses pool to imply the sea. So Elm Grove, Southsea becomes Birches Pool in his world and his story world. But yeah, really identifiably Southsea in places as well. So again, that influence is just coming in. Yeah.
Okay. So we were saying before that this is available to anyone, and fortunately, it appears that you're doing it and you're, taking the bull by the horns and getting these books published. That must take a lot of effort, though, and you're doing this through a Kickstarter. But it obviously will be. What's that like? I mean, I've never done a Kickstarter. I've seen them. How important is it to you to do it via a Kickstarter type project?
I didn't need to do it by Kickstarter, but I've never done a Kickstarter before, and I just wanted to give it a shot. I worked out that once I'd looked at all my costings, it would work out at about £4,500 with all the printing and all the work that I've done before and everything. And quite honestly, I thought it would be nice to be able to, because I could get the books printed and then have a huge credit card bill, which I then have to pay off, or if I've got people who are really interested in this and love this project, then they'll pay for it beforehand and they can pre-order, and that really helps me to get on. It takes the pressure off because the selling can be really, really full on. And so that's what I did. I set up a Kickstarter page, and I'm very lucky in that the way that that I've written, it clearly appeals to Kickstarter because they've made it one of the projects they like, which means that they promote it across their site, which is great because it's got kind of jokes in the write up and in the story that's involved. You know, it tells little jokes, and it's just kind of a bit more playful than going, well, this is a book about Arthur Conan Doyle stories and blah blah blah. You know, it doesn't have that kind of seriousness about it, and it celebrates it. You know, it celebrates the connection really.
Yeah.
I also had some other luck as well, which is that I kind of connected up to Joanne Harris, who is kind of writing hero of mine on Twitter, and also Neil Gaiman I follow as well. I think he's fantastic because, of course, there's the Neil Gaiman connection with Portsmouth. So I just thought, well, you know, why not tweet them and ask them if they'd mind retweeting, and both of them did. And I have to say that when Neil Gaiman and Joanne Harris retweeted my book and my Kickstarter, it really did take off. So you know, great stuff.
So it works. So yeah, so that's the reason, and that seems great. And I'm not going to go into the whole, you know, people buy different levels of the book, don't they? You're going to be doing nice hardcovers and all the kind of bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And that after this, because someone might be watching this video in a year's time, 2 years time. I'm assuming it will be available on Amazon. They'll be able to get it after that's all done.
Absolutely. Once it's launched, I mean, the people who come onto the Kickstarter will get it first,
and they'll get maybe a different, more glamorous version of it.
Yeah, well, yes, indeed, because what we've got some of the limited editions, you know, in different colours with limitation pages. There's a set of limited editions of which 25 each are only ever going to be printed. So you know, that's an immediate rare book. So if you're a collector, come and get my rare books, please. So yeah, but yes, but it will be made available afterwards. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So you've done this. I think you've done at least 3. You've published 3 Arthur Conan Doyle books. You did the first one, which was The Mystery of Water Light. You published, I think, A Study in Scarlet, or you did something. You did a very nice version of that.
I wonder if I got it on the shelf up there.
Okay.
No, it's not on the shelf.
Doesn't matter, but it's a very nice book. And now you've done this one. What else are you going to suck out of that archive? Because there must be so much more in there that you could still, you know, because you've got these stories. What else is in there? Well, what do you think you'd do next? Without giving away too much to, you know, other people might want to steal your ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, what happens with me is that when an idea comes to me, I just run with it like hell. I mean, I just really, really go for it. At the moment, there are several other things that I am looking at doing. I'm considering, for example, creating a series of these books, just you know, as to promote Southsea and Portsmouth essentially, and you know, remind people that this is where Conan Doyle did his thing. So there are a few projects on the go, but I can't really tell you because partially because I don't know.
Yeah.
Not
you also
really,
don't no. But there's obviously lots of exciting things, and you've got this book, and you've people have got this will be published on the day we film it. I'll be putting this up, and you know, this will be live. But then you have your Kickstarter, that'll be a success, and then people later on who haven't been able to be quick enough to get the all these rare books that you're talking about will be able to buy a copy of it, which can be fantastic. I think it sounds like it's going to be a really interesting look into the mind of Conan Doyle throughout his career, and people will learn stuff about him.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you know, he's such an interesting character because people mistake him for Sherlock Holmes. They think because he was a scientific guy, he's like Sherlock Holmes, but he's much more than Sherlock Holmes. You know, if I really look at him in the kind of, you know, cold light of day and look at all of his interests, he's much more a romantic. He's much more a kind of American transcendentalist than he is a kind of like a rationalist. He's got so much more going on with him. So yeah, there's plenty to explore. You know, and you know, this stuff about him going whaling in the Arctic. You know, there's a really fascinating story there, which is that he got a taste for boxing whilst he was in the Arctic, because one of the things that they used to do on board ships for fitness was they'd have all the sailors box, and of course he's this guy who's I think he's in his 3rd year at university at the time, and he had to take some time out to get some money and do other stuff. So he's on this ship, And they go, well, do you want to come and box? And he's like, yeah. Well, he's 6'2" and he's like 19 or 14 stone of lean meat. So he really liked his boxing. And they all, the sailors on board ship, these Arctic whalers, they're all like, wow, we really like, he's the best ship surgeon we've ever had, because we can box with him.
Mm.
Which is great.
So it all sounds like you said it's all boys' own adventure type stuff, and
Yeah,
that's what
totally.
it's. And there's lots of for the spooky owls people. It's lots of bit of horror and ghosty type things and all sorts
Yeah,
of wonderful stuff.
absolutely.
So it sounds like a really great book. So anyway, thanks for that, Matt. We look forward to getting our copy when it comes out, and we'll talk. I'm sure we'll talk to you about something, whatever your next project is. We'll talk about that. So you have a great time. See you later.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Take care.